So I'm Omer. I work at Irregular. I want to share with you an awkward situation I find myself in pretty regularly, completely by my fault, which is that in conversations or in talks like this or in other situations, I say things that make it sound like I should have a very good answer to questions like, where is AI going or where is AI security going? And we say things like, what we do is we try to understand what are the big problems coming up in AI security and find solutions for them. We run benchmarks and evaluations on models, sometimes before they come out. Sometimes we work with frontier labs on capabilities before they come out in order to understand where things are going. We work with governments to understand where things in regulation or other spaces are coming before they come up. And we're doing a lot of internal research and have internal signals and benchmarks about a lot of things relating to AI and AI security in practice. And then the obvious follow-up question is, great, so what is going to happen? What are the big challenges? What is AI going to be able to do? When will there be a catastrophe where AI hacks some important facility? Or, Ezra will come up to me and say, why don't you come and give a keynote and tell us where AI security is going? And the very, very awkward answer is that I really, really don't know. And before I go into what I do think to some extent that we can know, I do want to do the even more awkward thing and go into a whole lot of detail about why and how we don't know what's going to happen in AI security. Because I do think it's something that's at the very least useful to put on the table at the beginning of a conference and a talk like this. And the first very obvious thing is, and we've seen this across AI progress, not only recently, but for quite a long time, which is AI progress is not only fast, but it's sudden and it's weird. We see a lot of times benchmarks that are at zero for years sometimes, even when people are actively trying to train models to be able to do these sort of tests. And we've seen this recently with cybersecurity. And then at some point within months or weeks or sometimes years, suddenly go to saturation and get nearly 100%. And we've seen this with the Gemini 3 model card right now, where there was a very, very small note in there, which I think made very little headlines, but was very important, where they say, in our cybersecurity benchmarks, we've kind of retired all of our benchmarks of one specific type because they're not adding any useful information above that specific type of benchmark. And what that really means is, suddenly, and pretty suddenly, the model is able to do all of these tasks that a very short time ago we thought that are a good way to measure our progress and how fast we're going. It's true for the Anthropic report released recently, where they say, oh, Chinese actors are using Claude in order to do cyber operations. And there's a lot of uncertainty, because again, some of the details are there, and I don't know myself some of the important details, but even if we say there's genuine uncertainty about how sophisticated it was and how autonomous the models were, definitely not fully, but to what extent they were autonomous, even if you kind of round it down and say what is the minimum level of sophistication, of scaffolding, and of agents that were there, it is a huge jump up from nearly everything that we've seen, which is kind of human-led cyber operations, except for very narrow tasks, to something that is at very least effectively semi-autonomous. Somebody comes, checks in on it for a few hours, and not something where the model has to have a human by its side all the time. We, by the way, see this on internal benchmarks as well. I think the timing for this is a little bit weird. I think we're hopefully going to be able to publish this in the next few days, where we have seen internal benchmarks that we have not shared with the labs, and so we know nobody's training on them or overfitting them, of genuinely difficult, narrow cybersecurity tasks, which up until very recently had 0% success, 0% success, 0% success, 0% success, and are now going into considerably over 50% success in multiple models. And it's something that is really, really interesting, and next few days we'll have more scary graphs like the one that you saw about like how many AI security forms we will see. A lot of the specific questions that we want to ask about what progress looks like is still unclear, and the number one thing, and kind of that's usually what's in the news around this, is the frontier capability. So what is the difficulty or complexity of tasks that models will be able to do? And again, what we see over and over again is spikiness and uncertainty in the progress. Suddenly, huge progress in a specific type of tasks, but very little progress in something else. Models are able to solve incredibly difficult math problems, but then make calculation errors and get the answer wrong. And there's a question about what that means in practice. And they have a tool, they can write Python code, but they don't do it because they're weird models and they make silly mistakes. And when we try to graph model capabilities, we always have to remember and this works well again with Caleb's graph, and I really love that we saw that one before, where we see these graphs and they go up, and it doesn't matter if they seem to be going up fast or they seem to be exponential. There's always a huge uncertainty between a continued exponential growth, which can sometimes become out of control, sometimes even scarily soon, and a tapering off. That means, oh, it looks scary for now, but suddenly things are slowing down considerably, and we've seen so many examples of both of these. And so this is, thank you, Yoni, for collecting the data and creating this beautiful, beautiful graph of the goodness of models over time. And you can see how models are like increasing in a way that looks exponential up until that point marked today, but the possible future is still a huge uncertainty about how fast it goes. And when we ask not about frontier capabilities, but we ask about deployment, and we ask about utilization, and we ask about usage, we already see models being used for coding a lot, and we also see models used for content generation a lot. And there's a question about whether that goes into far more areas, whether it goes into cybersecurity to a large, meaningful extent, not helping people be a little bit faster, but genuinely helping set up configuration, setting up security for organizations, whether it starts helping doctors or lawyers or architects or anyone else. And I think the main thing to say there is, for many of these tasks, not all of them, but definitely many, the question isn't so much a question of whether the frontier capabilities are there. At least for some tasks, they absolutely are. But the question is productization and process and, let's say, regulation and liability and all of these other things around it. And so, as a random example, we've seen some studies that say in specific situations that we see in these experiments, and that's not applicable completely widely, in some areas, models are better than human doctors at diagnosing specific types of diseases. And that's all well and good, but that's almost meaningless for the question of can models effectively help actually diagnose patients, because there's a question about how that fits into the clinical process and what that means for insurance and liability and what that means for legality and regulation. But those questions are solvable. Whether they get solved in 6 months or 60 years is a genuine question. Anybody who's dealt with this sort of bureaucracy knows that 60 years is not completely far off from things that can sometimes happen. But the question is the question of a timeline, and that makes us feel somewhat certain, but we shouldn't be, because very, very long timelines are effectively a no for the near future. And so there's a genuine question of what that looks like. And there's further questions, right? So do we see open source models catch up to frontier models, and suddenly the strongest AI models are something that's dispersed across many, many different actors? Or will closed models kind of keep or even increase their advantage, and we'll see the strongest AI being very much concentrated in a few companies across the world? Do we see non-Western AI, DeepSeek, Qwen, reach those same levels with all of the different means that they're trying to do so? Or do we see them get left behind at some point because they have a genuine hard time getting as many GPUs as they would want? And of course, where does regulation? We've seen movement on regulation in the past few months, more so than we've seen for quite a while before recently. But then again, the questions of, will regulation have teeth? Will regulation be reasonable? Will regulation put us to the point where we are controlling dangerous capabilities of models while being able to advance the useful and helpful parts of what AI can do? Or will this be, at the end, everybody needs to click, I accept that this model is unreliable and may pose a danger to humanity. Okay, let's go, and I move on to the next page. And if I started this by saying, this is an awkward situation because this is a very important question, a question that theoretically we should have some insight into, and my genuine answer, as you can understand with a whole lot of details, I don't know. I want to ask what is the question that I can answer, and what is the sort of questions that I think are useful to answer when we want to ask these sort of wide-reaching questions that we don't have a good answer to. And this is, instead of saying, where is AI security going, what is going to happen with AI, where capability is going, there are dozens of different, more specific perspectives, sub-questions that give us a shine light on a particular part of this question, but that part of the question is A, tractable and answerable, and B, sometimes even directly useful to ask how can we make a difference, how can we help, how can we figure out what are the things that we need to build in order to make the world a little bit safer and more secure. And an example of this, and the one that I want to talk about now, is trying to put my finger on what are the specific assumptions that have generally held true in cybersecurity, at least in the past few years, sometimes further than that we kind of haven't thought about, that they're so obvious, kind of like a fish in water, we don't notice that we're wet. All of cybersecurity has kind of assumed things like, oh, things are happening at the pace that humans are able to do them, but then suddenly, maybe, we're in a world where some of these assumptions don't hold anymore. And so that's kind of the perspective I want to take looking forward and trying to kind of enumerate these assumptions and asking what that does to what do we need to build in AI security. So let's talk about these. And the first one, I kind of alluded to the beginning of it, but a lot of the things that are happening because AI starts to be able to automate a lot more things than before are around speed and pace, around trust, and a lot of these things breaking down. And let's, again, give these examples. And if I talk about speed, it's true across a lot of things, like if I want to set up security precautions, how fast do I do it? But the easiest place to see where it's the extreme case is when we think about, let's say, incident response as one specific part of cybersecurity, where when we think about incident response, we know there's a checklist. There are things that happen within minutes, and there are things that happen within hours, and there are things that happen within days. And now we start asking, if we don't need a fully autonomous AI. We absolutely don't need to even approach AGI. We need semi-autonomous AI where people can help make sure that it's not going way, way, way off track, but most things are happening at the pace of automation and not at the pace of humans, and start asking, what is the point where things happening in days become irrelevant? Because full cyber operations can happen in less time than that. Is there a point, and when does that point happen, when hours become irrelevant? Is there a point, and when does that happen, when minutes become irrelevant? And that's looking, again, being quite optimistic about genuine scientific breakthrough, definitely talking about minutes becoming irrelevant, but at the very least, days is absolutely in danger over the next reasonable foreseeable future. Same thing around trust. When we think about how we set up our security in the organization, there are lots of areas where we have this concept of this is a trusted individual. There are very few people, even in relatively large organizations, that let's say have the ability, technical ability and permissions to change security configuration. You assume if you give somebody this permission and this capability that they are highly trusted in a very vague sense of the word, but it generally means both technically highly trusted, they won't make silly mistakes, they won't delete my database, they won't delete my security configuration, and personally highly trusted. We know that this person is somebody that we assume with strong evidence they are not an insider agent, they don't have other motivations besides helping our organization be secure. Is there even a concept of a highly trusted AI? If there comes to the point where AI becomes a tool used within cybersecurity, where AI is used within business operations that allow it to touch sensitive materials, sensitive data, already happening, sensitive technical capabilities, is there a situation where we can say, this AI is trusted to the extent that I know it won't do anything bad, to the extent I can say this about a trusted person in my organization? And that's something that existed and might exist in a much, much weaker sense looking forward. Another complete point is asking about what do we think about finding anomalies and finding a baseline? And I'm not only talking about products that detect anomalies, which this is definitely a good example of, but even in general, when I set up a security configuration, I look at both data-driven, what actual behaviors are users on my system doing, and my own knowledge and experience of what sort of behaviors within the system are normal, are reasonable, are how a reasonable person uses our systems. Models are weird. We've seen that. They act differently. They do things that don't look like what humans do. And what's worse is models are updating the way that they work in some ways much faster than humans do. And what happens when every year a new frontier model comes out, goes into the base of the agents doing work within my system, and suddenly my understanding of what normal behavior looks like for setting up configuration, for doing forensics, for understanding if something is going wrong within my system, suddenly does not look the same. If we want to be a little bit even more paranoid and worried about these sort of things, what if over time, the data that I collect in order to understand what the baseline normal behavior looks like is also data of behavior by this same model that eventually will do something malicious within my system? And we've seen, again, cases where models can wait until a specific point in time in order to do tasks or malicious activities that they weren't doing from the start. Next, and this is related to some of these things, but there's generally this assumption working with technology that anyone or anything doing work within my system is either a human, and therefore they are smart, they are agentic, not in the model agent sense, the agentic in the human sense, they have the ability to look at data and then make like unique decisions compared to what was there before, but they're not fast. Or they are automations. They're fast, they can do things at the speed that humans don't, but they aren't really agentic, even if, I don't know, since the 60s, 70s, people try to make them look very agentic. What happens when those two things don't happen separately. What happens to things like protecting from insider agents? Insider agents are generally assumed to be few, assumed to be human. If you look at your hiring process, you do most of the work there in order to stop insider agents from entering your system. If you're big enough organizations, you can assume you have a few within your organization, and fair enough. And you have monitoring set up in order to be able to see the sort of things that insider agents would do. If models can work against your own interests, if an insider agent can come in with the base model on top of which you built the agent that you're running things within your system, then what happens now? How do you even figure out how to stop them from getting in? It's a completely different way of something entering your system that we've never seen before. And a lot of things that we know about insider agents are just not true. An example is the amount of them. You have lots of agents running. Each one of them can do something malicious. They can collude with each other across different roles in your organization in a way that, again, putting in dozens, hundreds of human insider agents into an organization is, at the very least, very difficult. And lastly, growing accessibility to advanced capabilities. There are levels of complexity of different cyber attacks. Some of them, let's say maybe 1,000 people in the world can do, some of them maybe 100,000, some of them more. And the problem with the fact that potentially advanced models put advanced cyber capabilities into the hands of more and more people isn't just that we are possibly likely going to see more attacks, is that it changes the basic calculus of threat modeling that organizations need to do. Because a lot of organizations, a whole lot of organizations, are in this spot where they say, we are not super well known, we didn't make anyone really, really mad at us, there's no reason for somebody to target us with the resources and attention and capability level needed to run complex attacks or medium complexity attacks even. And so what we need to be prepared for are the sort of casual spray and pray attacks that a lot of smaller actors are able to do. So I expect my people will get phishing emails, and that's fine, and we'll tell them how to deal with it. And I expect somebody will kind of port scan and look for publicly facing things that have one-day vulnerabilities, and so I need to make sure to patch everything. And there's a set of things you need to do so that the casual attacker is likely going to have a hard time getting into your system, and that's fine because the casual attacker doesn't care about it that much. They'll move on to whoever is easier than you to hack into. But then what if instead of 1,000 actors able to carry out more complex attacks, there are 1 million actors like that? That changes the calculus completely. Now, quite a lot more organizations need to upgrade their security to a level that is genuinely difficult for organizations of that size, of that sort of revenue and profitability, or even of how advanced they are technologically to be able to do, and that changes the world significantly. And we don't know when and how that changes. Again, I go back to, there's huge uncertainty about whether that's coming in very quickly or down the line. But if I'm asking, what is the assumption that we're doing? Nearly all of us, including today, are thinking about, oh, we're starting a company, we have an organization of this size, what is the level of cybersecurity we need? That's not even a question. I understand what that looks like because that's how it's been, I don't know, since the 90s at the very least when I don't know, internet became really a thing. And there's a lot more like this. I think these are like 4 examples, but I give this as an example for, I think it's a useful perspective to look at what we're seeing happening. And from these basic assumptions, we ask, so what are the challenges coming out of that? And what are the challenges that we want to solve in order to be able to at least deal with some of these things? And the one very, very obvious one is we see new, more attack surfaces. And when attack surfaces are new, that almost always means that we don't yet have the controls in order to do them. And a lot of times, we don't know the basic answers to the questions of what are the controls needed to do them. And one of the kind of historical examples I like to think about is somewhere around 90s, early 2000s, kind of the understanding that like buffer overflows are a thing happened in the world. And there was a long period in time where people were asking programmers to try and program without writing in accidentally buffer overflows into their code, which is absolutely impossible. And then a point in time where we were putting into like IDEs and compilers things that would like statically scan for buffer overflows and say, oh look, there's a buffer overflow here. You should fix it before putting it into production, which is again absolutely impossible to do in a way that's reliable. And it took a while until the world figured out that the way to stop buffer overflows is not to have them not exist in code, but to make them incredibly difficult to exploit. And enough people in this room know in depth the techniques that this is done. And I think a lot of areas we are in that same situation where we look at jailbreaks and prompt injections, the kind of most well-known types of attacks, and we see a cat and mouse game in which the cat is just unable to win. We create better classifiers and we try to find them in more directions, and still, today, it is genuinely easy to find new ones in a matter of hours, even for non-experts. We look at even more complex questions. Pre-training data poisoning. Can I write lots of comments on Reddit and suddenly put a backdoor into the base model that goes into a lot of systems? We've seen academics literally do this in practice. I think we can safely assume people are doing this without publishing it for their own needs. What about distillation attacks? We were talking about it for a while, but it became kind of a lot more prominent and well-known when supposedly that's what DeepSeek did in order to train their model and kind of utilize a lot of OpenAI's knowledge. But just the idea of, I'll just ask a model a ton of legitimate questions. I'll just keep asking regular user questions to the model, and with that, learn the model's weights or learn something very similar to this model, but kind of be able to steal the model just through being able to ask legitimate questions. We don't have good frameworks of even how to go about handling these sort of questions today. Next challenge, reliability, control, containment. The difference and the movement from automation to AI, and definitely agentic AI, is basically a difference in how we understand reliability. For most of the work that we've done, especially around cybersecurity, but even more generally, we have a good scope of what an algorithm can output. We say, okay, it's fine. I have an algorithm. It outputs numbers between 1 and 10. It might get it wrong, but it will still output a number between 1 and 10. And AI just doesn't seem to work like that. We try really, really hard to bake in. Don't output something very different. Don't do something that goes out of complete common sense. Don't accept input in ways that are not legitimate. And again, we do not know how to do that. And that means that we need a better answer to the question of, when the AI does not want to do is absolute personification of something that isn't nearly human, but when the AI wants to do something that I don't want it, how do I control it? Is it baking into better training? Is it into some sort of WAF-like interface around the model, looking at prompts coming in, looking at something coming out? Is it containment? Is it just working under the assumption the model will sometimes do terribly stupid or malicious things, and I just need to make sure to control the blast of how far that reaches? There's a question about what to do when we have technology that is genuinely less reliable than what we've seen in technology before, and at the very least, business incentives are very likely to force lots of people to put it into businesses and production and potentially important areas. Lastly, and I talk about this quite a bit recently, when I say there's no consensus on a guarantee, what I mean is, in cybersecurity, there's no 100%. No self-respecting, reasonable person, whether they sell a specific cybersecurity product or whether they give CISO services or anything, will say, don't worry, if you do these things, you are protected, period, end of sentence. Go and sleep well at night. It's always a question of probabilities, and the way that we get around this as an industry is we have an agreement and a consensus of what sort of promise, what sort of guarantee I get from different parts of my defense, from different parts of my system. And so the kind of simple example is an incredibly simple firewall, and they're more complex than this now, but as a basic idea of a firewall says, I'm not promising you nobody will get into your network. I'm promising you something very simple. You tell me which ports to open, you tell me which ports to close. These will be open, these will be closed. And a CISO that is using or buying a firewall says, okay, this promise is enough for me. I understand what I'm getting from the firewall, and I'm good with that. That allows me to either sleep well at night because the rest of my system is handled in different ways, or allows me to know that I'm not going to get fired because I did the best practice that I need to do, or allows me to continue on my day without saying, I have an issue here, but there's an agreement on both sides of the firewall can actually do this, and the CISO is happy with this promise. It's true for software areas that aren't as clearly defined. And again, I'm going back to kind of incident response, where the sort of promise that incident response makes is around effort. These are the sort of things we can do immediately. These are the capabilities we can deploy. These are the level of experts we have. These are the tools we have at our disposal. These are past cases about how well we did. And a CISO would look at this and say, okay, I understand either this is industry best practice, or I think this is good enough, or I've been in incident response and I know that doing better than this is very hard. Whatever causes them to say, this agreement, this guarantee that you've given me, it's about effort, it's not even about results in a lot of cases, this is good enough. With AI security, we still have not gotten to the point where there's reasonable industry consensus on what guarantee we should be giving. When we talk about, again, the simplest examples, we talk about jailbreaks. There's 1 minute left. 5, cool. When we talk about even jailbreaks, the most obvious and simple example, the question about when I give you a system to stop jailbreaks from corrupting your models, am I saying this is a best effort, I tried really, really hard and I'm an expert so it's fine? Am I saying state-of-the-art, well-known experts, well-known jailbreaks outside will not get through? Am I saying something like 99-point-something% of jailbreaks don't work on my, like what is the sentence that we want to say that we can all agree on, this is what we expect? And if we have that for jailbreaks and prompt injections, and we have that for data poisoning, and we have that for segmentation in the world of AI, and we have that for each of them, and they come together and do something that's reasonable, then we will be able to protect AI systems or protect systems in the world of AI. But until we have that, it's a wild west of lots of people making very, very different claims. Some of them they can actually stand behind, and when they do stand behind, a lot of times they seem at least insufficient to people trying to assess them. And going back from the 3 of these things, the kind of main thing that keeps popping up again and again, we're not seeing a small incremental step. Oh, there's this new technology, it adds a little bit, great, we had segmentation systems and EDRs and permission systems. Now just like add the word with AI to each of them and suddenly we're okay and everything is going to be fine. There's something more basic happening here. There's more basic questions that we as an industry need to solve. And a lot of the way that we're thinking about them is that being able to solve them is incredibly valuable, at the very least to be able to then stop genuine harm and risk. The one bit of perspective I'll add at the end for this is that we've sort of seen these things before. And when we think about big advances and changes in technology, this sort of thing tends to happen, but because kind of time is moving forward, it looks a bit different between these examples. And so the kind of most fun examples is phone phreakers kind of being able to get free calls, or at the worst case, right, being able to get somebody else to pay for your calls by doing embarrassingly simple things like whistling into a phone, right? And the idea was we still did not know, very general I'm not that old. We still didn't know how to secure telecommunications network, and therefore attackers could do whatever they pleased. Later down the line, 90s, internet was new enough that we did not know how to secure it, and you see teenagers hacking into the Pentagon multiple times. That's a wild thing to think about today, but that's because we just genuinely did not know what are the basics needed in order to have security in the world of the internet. And we're entering into a stage like that now, where we don't understand the basics of securing in the world of AI, where if we want to make that comparison down the line, we have to remember 2 very important things, and unfortunately they pull in different directions, so it's hard to get a conclusion. But one is, over time, we do have more general infrastructure in how to get our act together and figure security out. And I both mean technological, but not only, even social infrastructure, in the sense that there are more organizations looking at security from a global perspective. There's more understanding of cybersecurity in general. There are more, literally, cybersecurity professionals working on solving these problems. And so we do have more tools at our disposal in order to be able to answer a lot of difficult questions, and not just very few people who don't understand what cybersecurity is because nobody told them that that was even a thing that exists in the world. And so we have more tools to try to do this now. But on the other hand, the expected harm, the extent to which a lone wolf, a bored teenager, can potentially cause harm is increasing, right? With phone phreakers, the worst thing you can do is get somebody you really don't like to pay for a lot of long-distance calls. And when the internet suddenly is hacking into the Pentagon, the world today is a lot more digital and connected. And so we maybe have more tools to get our act together, but the potential harm until we do is potentially much, much bigger. And so I think the way that I kind of want to leave this talk at the beginning of the conference for today is that is kind of the mission that we have, to be as quick and as good as possible at getting our act together. And I think that's one of the things that we should be thinking about today. So thank you very much. I will have a Q&A section and then be at the booth for Irregular for most of the rest of the day. See you all later.